Hey, Derek here. I wanted to do a reflection video on my time in Melbourne and Wellington. Should point out some of the key things that are sitting with me from that week. First things first, most of the anchor of my time in Melbourne was the Public Sector Network's Government Innovation Week. And I have a whole series of videos that I've done on that. But there is one idea in particular that's been sitting with me I want to pull out. My highlighter, the thing that really stood with me, is the presentation by Nigel Pinto, where he talks about how AI is increasing the interconnectivity of government. So government is notoriously siloed and data is hidden in these different pockets, and AI is helping weave this stuff together, which is amazing. But Nigel says there's danger with this because that increased interconnectivity is also increasing complexity. And because it's AI that's doing the interconnectivity, AI is notorious for obscuring, so the black box of AI. And so we don't really understand what's going on fully within that black box. The other piece of it that he talks about is like, look, we have this assumption that AI we can just throw any data we want at, organize it for us. And that's not exactly true. The messier the data that you put in, the more unpredictable the results you get out of it. And says there's a real danger that as government leans more and more into AI to clean up its mess, that the outputs of this AI is going to become increasingly unpredictable, and we're not going to know what's going on or where it's coming from. And so his solution is first off, just simplify as much as you can. And second, clean up your data, really get your infrastructure in place so that when you put AI onto it, you're going to be able to trust the results and you're going to get more effective results and less hallucination. So I thought it was really interesting to really look at the infrastructure that AI is built upon, and that the quality of infrastructure leads to the quality of output from that AI. The other piece that's really interesting from Melbourne is one of the evenings I hosted a Civic punk social. I want to do more of these because it really brought together quite an eclectic group of people, not just people who work in government, but people who work in community, people who work in academia. And we had debates and a far-ranging bunch of conversations about the future of government. And I think some of the key things that I'm sitting with from that conversation is one, this idea of relocalizing government. I think this is something you're going to see more and more of because people feel so disconnected from government, and that government is something that happens to them without them being part of it. I think there's going to be a push to really relocalize it so that people feel a greater sense of control. And there's a huge opportunity with this because the more you engage people in their communities, the better results you're going to get in terms of policy and programs. So that's quite exciting. I think we're going to see more of that sort of push towards relocalization. We also had this really interesting debate about mandatory national service, not necessarily military service, but like community service. And the idea is that everyone should have to put some time in supporting and developing the community that they're part of. But it also gives people a common experience across diversity, a chance to mingle with diversity. And in a world that's becoming increasingly siloed in these sort of digital echo chambers, that commonality will be really important for social cohesion that we're seeing splinter right now. And we even had a whole conversation about whether it's even possible to change systems at all, whether systems naturally just try to keep sort of self-perpetuating. My own view on it is yes, of course, systems do have a certain form that they try to reinforce, but also systems are constantly in motion, constantly in movement. And so I think strategically, if you can understand what is anchoring a system in place, because every system has anchors that hold in place. And if you can shift those anchors, the system will naturally change as a result of that. From there, I went to Wellington, which is a lot of fun. And I did a lot of really interesting stuff in Wellington. I hung out with the Policy Project, did an event with them, had a great lunch with them. We talked a lot about participatory policy making, co-designing around policy making, which is quite fun. I also had a really interesting conversation at Hut City Council. They are doing some really cool stuff, particularly on AI adoption at the local level. They're actually selling their approach to local governments all over the place. So I'm going to sit down with them and have a deeper dive into that. So there'll be a video coming out on that soon. But I think the thing that's really sitting with me for my time in Wellington is this disconnect that I've seen in lots of different places, but it came up in Wellington again, where you have an older generation of civic punks who've been pushing for change in government that are just feeling burnt out. It's exhausting work, and I think the pandemic really knocked us back a bit. But the other thing is that usually you'd have sort of this next generation coming in to sort of fill in and be energized. And then you connect the two of them together. You get the older generation with the wisdom and experience, you get the younger generation with ideas and enthusiasm. But the younger generation and the older generation are just not waking up the same way as they used to. And as a result, it's really fractured. The younger generation is less engaged in work. They have a different relationship to work. And as an outcome of that, there just doesn't seem to be the same community around change in government, the same movement and energy. And this ties into another conversation that I've had more recently that is sitting with me, in this idea that maybe we're ending one age and giving birth to a new one, but we're kind of in the interregnum, the space in between these two different worlds. And so you see a lot of things there from that old age, that pre-pandemic time, that don't seem to fit or are sort of limping along or have sort of lost their spark. And I mean, if I'm perfectly honest, I put in things like 450 and Creative Baroque Festival and a lot of the social networks that I've been part of, One Team Gov, for example, they just don't seem to have the same energy and life to them and are struggling to adapt to whatever age we're in now. But we also haven't figured out what the new things are yet. And I'm kind of hoping this is what Civic Punks can be as an exploration, is to try to figure out what are those new things and how do these other things need to adapt and change to fit into this new world that is now emerging. Yeah, so something I'm still thinking about. Anyways, those are just some of the key things that came out of my time in Melbourne and Wellington. And then next week it's Canberra, getting the pronunciation right, and then Tokyo. So stay tuned for that.